Hi guys, and welcome to Offgrid and Connected, a podcast about off-grid humanitarianism, building, living and community. I'll be speaking to some fascinating guests to talk about their stories, how they're changing the world for the better, the initiatives they work with, and one major theme that will run through the conversations is how to put power back into our hands. And that means focusing on what we're for and not what we're against. Focusing on what we want and not bitching and whining about what people have taken away from us. There are great people, organizations and communities doing just this, and so I want to ask questions to them, learn about their initiatives and realities, and explore practical ways that anyone can become more resilient, free and independent. This goes for people in the developed world, or misdeveloped world as I like to call it, and with those in the so-called developing countries, or the majority world. This first interview is with Harrison Gardner. We cover his story, how he became a foreman on World Builds, key learning experiences he's had with NGOs, and how he started working with Earthship Biotecture. We go over the basics of how Earthships work, what makes an ideal project, and much, much more. Harrison is a teacher at heart, and I have seen firsthand how he transmits his passion. He's taught me a lot, and it's a real pleasure to bring him on the show. So thanks for listening, and please enjoy this conversation with Harrison. Okay, Harry, thanks for coming on. Thanks for coming on Offgrid and Connected. This is the first podcast for both of us, so this is going to be fun. And as we said, the worst thing that can happen is that we have a conversation, which we've done before. Where in the world are we finding you?
I'm at my home in Ireland, on the west coast of Ireland. It's like 10 in the morning. The sun's pretty low because it's the middle of winter. And I'm just standing outside. Cool.
So we first met very briefly at the Earthship Academy near Bordeaux, and then worked together on the HEC Earthship in Nepal, which is where we sort of got to know each other. And I mentioned the idea of an off-grid podcast to you, and you said do it, which is what your attitude in general is, just do it, it seems. So here we are. And I see a lot of what you do as teaching and leading groups in challenging conditions. But how do you answer the question when people say, "What do you do?" What is your short and maybe your long answer to that?
My short answer always is just that I'm a builder, and it's kind of intentional that I call myself a builder, and I'm like very proud to call myself a builder. It's not on any of the forms that you fill out when it asks you your occupation, or when I'm going through like the security in the States. There's no builder checkbox. Everything in building is much more specified than that now.
That's funny. I put builder on the foreman entering Nepal. I put builder. I was like, screw it. I'm gonna put it down.
Yeah, exactly. And so building has become much more specialized, and people learn one part of building now. They become very good at it, and they let other people do all the other parts of it. And I guess for me, it's been an important part of my journey has been learning all the parts of building and not leaving anything else for other people to figure out and hoping that other people will solve all the problems in that area. So it's definitely intentional for me that I call myself a builder and not a carpenter or a plumber or an electrician or any of those things.
Cool. So yeah, you said you're proud to be a builder. Is that what you wanted to do as a kid?
I don't remember exactly what I wanted to do as a kid. I remember that I wanted to be rich, for sure.
Okay.
That was definitely a goal of mine when I was like under 10 years old. My goal was whatever I did had to make me enough money that I could do whatever it is that I wanted to do. And then that that changed a lot as I got older.
When do you think that changed?
My oh wow. Wow, within 5 minutes, we're talking about my parents. Good work.
That's actually the next question is what background you had. So this is great.
Well, there you go. My mum, in my eyes at least, is notoriously bad with money. She made a lot of bad decisions when I was growing up, and they really stuck with me. And I guess in my form of rebellion, when I was getting towards leaving high school, I mean, it was over several years that my ideas around money changed. But when I was getting to leaving high school, I decided that I was going to save up a whole lot of money and give it all away, because it's like exactly what my mum would not have done. That's like the exact opposite of what she would have done. She would have invested it, and she would have found a way to have it make me money. And so I finished high school, and I was 18 years old, and I saved up, I think it was like 12 grand, which was a lot then. When I was 18, it felt like a lot anyway. And I went to Kenya, and many things happened in Kenya, but the core of it, the reason I went, was to spend this 12 grand building buildings for other people.
So had you built much before that then to have the confidence to then go there and do that?
I'd done a bit of building. My parents built the house that I grew up in. My brother, who's 10 years older than me, built a house while I was a teenager, and I helped him with that as well. And I had several different part-time jobs doing different kinds of building, mostly in the carpentry realm. And I guess the intention when I was going over there wasn't that I wanted to become a builder or that I even saw a huge value in buildings. It was just that I saw to help.
Right. So you're in Kenya and you land at the airport, and what did you do next?
Right. Yeah, this is way back. I went over there with a group that I don't even remember the name of now. It was an Australian organization, one of those groups that you pay them a bunch of money and you go over there and build a couple of buildings together. Not with any builders or anything. They were in hindsight, they were very unorganized and maybe not quite as legitimate as I would have liked, or at least as groups I've encountered since then. But they were my connection to going to Kenya. And but right after I got there, there was the 2008 election riots that started in Kenya.
Wow.
That lasted for a year. And so I'd only been there a month when those riots started, and the group pulled out right away. Most of the participants left, and me and a couple of others decided to stay. We didn't feel like we were in any danger at all. We rented a house, and I was in the city of Kisumu in West Kenya. And and I ended up staying for a year. We had to do a few trips out of Kenya when things got a little chaotic there. But other than that, I just stayed and worked, and ended up working with a local NGO, which also weren't very honest, and I had some very mixed experiences with. But all in all, I learned a lot on that trip, and I learned a lot of what not to do, and I learned by mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask. Well, so I guess you'd go down to Tanzania and then come back into Kenya, or
exactly. I went over to Uganda or to Rwanda, went up to Ethiopia, and those parts of my trip were more or less fine. Different weird experiences that happen to anyone who spends time traveling by matatu and rickshaw around East Africa. But I guess the key learning experiences were how to watch out and spot NGOs that maybe aren't legitimate, maybe have ulterior motives, and yeah, I guess if I was to like sit down, and I could never tell my mum this, but like I definitely wasted all that money that I went there to give away for good reasons. At the time I thought I was spending it very fairly on good things, and I realized towards the end of my trip, while I was laying in bed with malaria, that that the organization had been just slowly siphoning all of this money off of me and not spending it on anything.
Wow, that's a
So
big lesson early on, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely. And so I remember I went back to Australia, and I I wasn't disheartened with the idea, but I was done with Africa. I was done with East Africa, and my mother was born in Tanzania. She's white. Her parents are Dutch, but her father was a surveyor there, and so growing up between Tanzania and my father growing up in South Africa, and my mother moving there as well, our house was full of Africa. It was full of all of these bits and pieces that they brought over with them when they immigrated right before I was born. And so I'd always felt this really strong connection to Africa and to East Africa, and that had evaporated after spending a year there, and the experiences that I had there. I decided I needed to go a little further.
Wow, and I hear you about Africa. I mean, I've spent a total of probably 2 years there, and it has a strange way of giving you so much and taking so much at the same time, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's such a amazing place that I think everyone should go there, and especially anyone interested in like doing humanitarian work should go there, and just to either get ripped off, or to feel not safe, or to feel confused and conflicted about all the things that are going on around them. I think it's just a really important place to learn.
Yeah, I mean, there's that confusion is definitely the thing that strikes, that sort of the two things that really come to my mind straight away when I think of my experiences in Kenya, Tanzania, and Mozambique are confusion, but then also just massive smiles.
Sure, yeah.
And that's something that you just don't see in Europe as much, for sure. You don't see, and kids always run. That's the other thing I always remember. Kids are always running. It seems when I've been there. But
That's true.
so just to move on from Africa, but before we leave Africa, so what would be the York bullet points of what to watch out for in an NGO?
Oh wow, I don't feel so qualified to answer that, but I guess for me, the things that, and I mean, now I don't spend so much time working with NGOs, and I'm definitely not on my own. At least when I'm going to these places, I usually go by recommendation or word of mouth. But I think it's just about really understanding what they're spending money on, what they're spending all of their money on, not what they're advertising that they spend your money on. Sorry, not even their money. What they're spending your money on. What work you're going to be doing for which people, why that's even important for them. There's too many. Aid around the world is such a huge topic, and a crazy topic of things getting built and given and donated for people who have needs, and it's not clear if people are getting what they need, if they're getting their needs met, if what has been identified as their needs or their community shortcomings are in reality the things that are going to make their lives better, or make them happier, or give them longer life expectancies, or prevent disease in those communities. They're the important questions. And I guess after feeling like I wasted my money there, and not actually feeling bad about that, but just acknowledging it and just accepting it, I ask a lot more questions now. I try to make sure that any work that I'm doing actually needs to be done, that I'm not going into a community to put in a dozen toilets when that community squats in a field and they don't want to use toilets, and there's no point putting in a dozen toilets until that community decides on their own that they want to use toilets, that they don't want to squat in a field. And understanding that there's a proper order to things, and that just because I do something a certain way or because I see value in something doesn't mean that someone else is going to see value in it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the great example of that, famous one in the sort of NGO world, is the one of people building wells, and I've forgotten where it is now. Villagers not using the well because it took away from their sort of a lot of the women's social time of walking down and gossiping and having some time away from the house, and being able to just go down to the well and take the hour it took to get there to fill up the water and chat, basically. And they wanted to do, that's what they wanted. They didn't want to just be able to fill up the water and then get back to work.
Yeah. And that comes from ignorance of not understanding the bigger issues in a community, from not being from a community. So it was really important to those women that they had time away from the men, that they had time away from whatever situations they were all coming from in that family environment and that community environment, that they got to isolate themselves periodically from that. And you can't know that stuff unless you spend time with communities.
No, I hear you. I mean, that's one thing that I've always felt better with. It's not absent these questions when I've been building off-grid stuff around the world, I've always felt like, well, at least I would want this, you know, and that's a good starting place. It doesn't mean it's ideal, but I think a lot of the stuff that what we build, for instance, would be a house that I would definitely want to live in.
Sure. Yeah.
Cool. Well, that's Africa, and that was the experience in Kenya, but that wasn't all you did. You went to India as well, didn't you?
Yeah. So I got back to Australia after Kenya, feeling a little, what's the word? Disillusioned with the whole idea of giving and of aid work, and not giving up on it completely, but not sure what my next move was going to be. And then I was back in my hometown, which is a place called Kilcare, about an hour and a half north of Sydney in Australia. And there was this little kind of weird boutique gift store down at the bay where I lived. And I used to go in there occasionally, and it was the kind of gift store that I couldn't really afford anything in there. But she just had the most weird and interesting things, like tea towels for $80 and like a cross section of a train track for like $250. And I had no idea why she had all these things in there, but people would come and buy them. And I ended up developing like a friendship with this woman, and I'd go in there and we'd chat and we'd drink coffee together. And occasionally I'd buy like little like trinkets and small things in there. And one day I found this product. It was a little toy, like a stuffed animal but it was an animal that didn't exist. It was this oblong red shaped animal with a long beige colored nose and pigeon feet, and no tail, and just looked really weird, like a sausage with legs. And I read the tag, and it was made by a company called Bolu, and the tag explained that these kids in a school in India had drawn all these animals, and that Bolu had taken the animals and recreated the drawings in the proportions and in the shapes that the kids had made them, and turned them into stuffed animals. And all the money being raised by selling these animals was going to build new schools for these kids.
Wow.
And I was talking to the woman about it, and it sounded like an amazing concept and an amazing idea. And she was like, yeah, I know that woman. Her name's Jodie Freed. You should email her, because she knew I'd been in Africa and been doing work there. And so I did. So I emailed Jodie, and I wrote this email explaining the work I'd just been doing in Africa, and that I was really interested in talking to her about the work she was doing in India and seeing if I could help in some way. And I must have been a bit nervous and articulated myself very formally, because when I went to meet Jodie, she had a design company in Sydney at the time, making textiles and lots of other things. And she was expecting this 50 or 60-year-old man to arrive, and I'm 19, and I show up on the door with my, like, you know, just like very bedraggled. I think I showed up on a skateboard, and she was expecting this kind of experienced builder, project manager, who had just spent a year in Africa, to show up and kind of take her project and take it forward. And anyway, we started talking, and once she got over my age and I guess my look, we got down to the core of it and decided that I would be able to help her. And we started making loose plans for 6 months in the future, that I would go over, and I would help project manage the first of these, or the second of these preschools. One had been built previously, the second of these preschools to get built. And so that company was called Bolu, and Bolu teamed up with a group called Architects Without Borders, an Australian architecture group, or maybe international, sorry, that the Australian branch of it. And so myself and an architect from Architects Without Borders went to India and were connected with a NGO there called Manav Sadhana. And Manav Sadhana means service to mankind. And I was very wary showing up there. I knew after everything I'd gone through in Kenya, I was kind of ready for anything. I was very suspicious. And after 3 weeks, I was completely convinced and sold, and I was in love with these guys, with everything that they were doing. And I don't know if it was the contrast of what I was expecting to what I got and who they were, or if they genuinely were the most humble, sincere people I'd ever met. But I ended up staying in India for 2 years. And I built 9 preschools, with Manav Sadhana. And at some point I kind of switched from working with Architects Without Borders and Bolu to just working for Manav Sadhana, because it allowed me to have a bit more diversity in what I was doing. There were less expectations on me to be on one project at all times. I had the freedom to help someone in the street if I decided to go and work on different projects in different communities if I wanted to. So
that was no longer self-funded then?
It was. I used the word work very loosely.
That's a great, I think that's important to do that.
But it was self-funded up until I'd been there 6 months, and Manav Sadhana gave me a room to sleep in, and they fed me lunch every day, and I just had to cover my breakfast and dinner every day, and anything outside of that I wanted to do, which meant over 2 years I didn't go into a lot of debt, but I went into a decent amount of debt while I was there.
Wow. So you came back with a very different experience of humanitarian work, and then B, a lot more experience of project managing this time, I'd imagine, or?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I guess the project management experience, it's like learning anything, whether they're good experiences or bad, it's all learning, and it's all making you better at doing that job. And doing job after job, 9 preschools and 2 community centers, I was like, I'd done a lot. I'd worked with a lot of different people. I'd been working with like very qualified, like structural engineers in India, and then translating those drawings into something my builders in the slums could actually put together. And with no experience at all, definitely flying by the seat of my pants a bit, but relying on the people's experience around me, that the builder was going to tell me what he was able to build and what he wasn't able to build. And through working with him and working with other builders and seeing what their skill levels were, I started to understand like what was possible. And through my own experience of building, like started to understand like, all right, well, we can take this thing from this structure in this country and put it here and this thing, and started mixing and matching ideas. And I got to share a few concepts with them, and they taught me a lot about their local ways of building and of structure.
Wow. So at this point, what kind of, very briefly, what kind of techniques are you using to build at this point?
The most boring.
Right.
Now I build like this occasionally, but very rarely. Concrete slab floor, brick walls, tin roof. Basically the fastest, cheapest structure that you can throw up in a developing country. No function, no concern about orientation, no design other than to keep the sun off your head and the rain off your head. Right. And to have a lock on the door so everything didn't get stolen that you put inside the building. That was its sole function, and to fit 33-year-old kids inside of it. Got you. And what sort of cost are we talking about by square meter? I mean, if you don't have... Sorry, because they were preschools, just to clarify that. That's why there were 30 kids inside them. Right. So what sort of costs are we talking about for a square meter? I mean, I can always add this to show notes and stuff, but off the top of your head. Off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you. It was less than 10 grand a building. Okay. That's including local labor, and we're talking a building that is about probably less than 5 by 5 meters. More often like 4 by 3 meters. Just a single room. Sometimes with a toilet, sometimes not. Sometimes there was a toilet locally that they could use. Super simple structures. They all took about a month to 6 weeks to build. And yeah, the majority of the money was on materials. Local labor was very cheap. I would say they started off probably in the like less than $5,000 range, and they went up to about 10,000 over that 2 years. Okay, so dollars US, yeah. Probably dollars Australian that I'm talking in, which back then was comparable. Okay. This is like 8 years ago now. Okay, no, that sounds okay. Got you. Cool. So that was just a lot of lessons, but then maybe, I don't know if you have to fill me in between. Well, no, let's ask it this another way. From those houses, what were the next sort of techniques that started moving you towards off-grid building? Okay, so sorry to interrupt. By off-grid building here, I'm sort of saying, let's say more natural materials as well as the function of being off-grid. Sure. Well, there was a couple of years after India of building with conventional materials back in Australia, that led me to like wanting to use other materials. After India, I for some reason decided to get married, and because of that, as part of that decision, decided to live in Australia, and so I had to work there a lot. So I was doing a lot of carpentry there, dabbling in some other forms of building, all with just conventional materials that you buy from the biggest hardware store that's available. And there was probably 2 years of that. And then I separated from my partner then, and almost went into a completely different line of work. The whole time that I was building, my other job, when there wasn't enough money to be made in building, was making coffee. I was a barista for a lot of years, and I started moving from that into coffee roasting and into coffee farming. A coffee roaster flew me over to the Philippines to look at potential coffee farms there that we could start importing beans from, and a lot of things in my life were leading towards that, and I was doing the building less and less. And I think it was flying back from the Philippines on that flight that I realized that as much as I appreciate good coffee and am grateful for coffee, that for me it wasn't enough. That contributing to the coffee world and contributing to that industry and that level of enjoyment for everyone wasn't important enough for me to spend the rest of my life doing it. And I decided that if I was going to leave, I had to leave now. That anywhere past that point was going to create more drama and be harder and harder to leave. People were starting to invest money in me to like learn certain skills and to get better at certain things, and start farms and roasteries and those kinds of things. And so I dove straight back into building. But I dove back in with the realization that I had weaned off building for a reason, that it had started becoming boring, that putting in the same hardwood floors over and over again for people who can afford very expensive hardwood floors, and building these basic stud wall structures and cladding them with gyprock, it just wasn't satisfying for me. I wasn't learning anymore. I wasn't enjoying the structures that I was building, and they weren't the structures that I wanted to live in. And so I went to America. I went to the northwest of America. A good friend of mine from the India years lived there. So I was up in Washington State and started doing some natural building with him, building with cob and straw, and went down to Oregon and worked with a group there called the Cob Cottage Company, and did a bit of work with Adobe and cob with them, learn about rocket stoves and mass heaters through various people in Oregon, and started spending a lot of my energy and time on learning natural building techniques, and basically because they were the structures that I wanted to live in.
Totally got that. Well, it's mass stoves, and now we're moving more towards the natural building and off-grid, I suppose.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't move to it because I saw a great overarching problem with the structures that we were building, or a big worldwide problem of the way that we were living. It was much more personal. I was just bored. I was bored of the materials that I was building with, and I was bored of the structures that I was building.
Okay, so take me along that trajectory towards I guess maybe moving down to Taos, was it, or is this still later?
Yeah, Taos was still a few years after that. So after spending time in America, I went back to India. I bought myself a Royal Enfield 350cc motorbike, and I rode from Mumbai all the way to Bhuj, which is almost in Pakistan. It's in the Kutchi Desert, and I met with a group there, an architectural group called Hunarshala, and Hunarshala were a commercial architecture company that did a lot of development work. And so they're the kind of architecture company that governments and bigger groups would employ to design better slums, or design water systems for slums, or design better living situations for low income families in those cities. And so I went out there to meet them through my contacts that I already had in India, and I got so much more than I was expecting from them. They had their own small school set up where they were teaching the local youth how to build with natural and recycled materials. They were making terracotta tiles, the style that you see in France and Italy and Spain, the ones that are made over your thigh, the clay that gets mixed up and rested over the thigh. They were making those tiles. They were making dry adobe mud bricks. They were making dry cement bricks with manual machines. They were doing a whole lot of woodwork with wood from right near Bhuj. There's the biggest ship dismantling yard in the world, where all the ships go to die and get pulled apart, and they get sold for all their parts. The cheapest thing that you can buy from there are these truckloads of terrible wood that can't really be used for anything else. It's weird dimensions. It's full of nails. So Hundershala would go, they would buy truckloads of this wood. They would bring it in. The boys would knock the nails out. They'd knock the screws out, and they would turn them into floorboards, or they'd turn them into staircases, or they would turn them into all these beautiful products, that they would then, figure out a way to produce them quickly and on a large scale. And then they would implement them into the designs that Hundershala were doing for different communities around India.
Wow. So that's the beginning of reuse coming in right there, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was while I was in India on that trip, that an ex-girlfriend of mine out of the blue, sent me an email, with a link to Earthships, and I'd never heard of Earthships. And she said, she said she saw something about it and she thought I might be interested in it. And I looked at it, and I was probably at Hundershala when I saw the website. And there's this construction company that's using recycled materials, and their buildings looked kind of weird, but it looked like they had some really, really good techniques for using all of these recycled materials. And it was totally in line with what I was doing there. And so I signed up for their next academy, which was starting, I think, 3 weeks later from when I was looking at it in Ushuaia in Argentina.
Oh, wow. So that would have been what? That would have been 2014 early, or is that right?
Yeah, I think it's January 2014.
Okay.
Yeah. So 4 years ago. Right?
Yeah. 4 years ago now. Yep.
Yeah. And so 3 weeks later, I'm in Ushuaia, Argentina. I've never done this kind of program before. I show up. There's a whole lot of people there that are really excited and really passionate about this thing called Earthships. And I still didn't really understand what Earthships was.
Great.
Everyone was talking about this guy called Mike, and I didn't know who Mike was.
Wow.
And so I'm just there nodding along, just like minding my own business. I go to site the first day, and I see the crew, and I'm like, well, I paid a bunch of money to be here. I guess I better see what they're doing. I'm just going to help them. And it's totally in my nature anyway. If people are building something, I just want to go and help them do it. And so, I think the very first day I skipped class. I was just like, I wasn't ready to go and sit in a classroom and learn. I saw that where the building was going to be, and I saw all the crew working there, and I was like, okay, I need to go and start doing this, and then I'll learn about the other stuff. And so I did the academy, the Earthship Academy. I learned about all their techniques. I found out who Mike was.
So how did the crew react to this student sort of turning up and starting to build? Were they immediately receptive, or was it?
Well, no, I wasn't the only one, but I was the only one who was there before them every day. And it wasn't really because I was excited. It was because I paid so much money to be there that I was like, I gotta make the most of this. I've by this point in my life, I'm pretty good at just throwing money away and accepting it and taking lots of gambles. And I was like, well, I've got to do everything in my power to learn as much as I can while I'm here. So I was on site before the crew most mornings. Even on the days that I went to class, I would go and spend an hour with the crew in the morning, and then I'd go to class. So
was that the first moment? I mean, I'm guessing this is the beginning of the building. So were you pounding or?
Yeah. Just pounding tires with Phil. I kind of assigned myself as Phil's sidekick. So Phil was the foreman on that project. And there were a few other crew members there, but I just every morning I would go up to Phil and be like, all right, Phil, what am I doing today?
Wow. And difficult to find a better person to be a sidekick to.
Yeah. Well, I didn't give him a choice. He seemed to be the one who knew what was going on. So I So I just went to him every time.
Great. And what was your first impression or thoughts when you were like, okay, tires, filling up tires? What as a builder, what were you thinking at that point?
I've developed this technique over the years of not asking too many questions while I'm learning something, but like waiting until it's done to like ask all of my questions, assuming that the answers are going to come along the way. So I guess I was naturally reserving all of my concerns and questions until the end, until the month was kind of done, assuming that between the classes and the practical work that I was doing and the fact that this company was teaching, I was like, they've definitely got a good system for like transferring all of this knowledge.
Yeah.
I didn't ask many questions. I just did it.
So you never said one last question, as I must have done about 20 times.
No, never. I think after I remember one of my jobs on that build was to plaster the underside of both of the vaults of that building. And I don't know if you've ever plastered the inside of a vault, but it's the most tedious. And yeah, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's the most disheartening, like soul crushing, tedious work that you can do. And I did one of them and I was like, finally, it's done. And I'm not alone. There's other people working there as well. And I go out to Phil. I'm like, all right, Phil, that vault's done. What's up? What's next? And he's like, well, there's the other vault. and I go and I poke my head in there. I'm like, what? No one's been doing this while I've been doing the other vault? So I plastered the other vault and then I go back out to Phil. Like this is like 3 days later. And I'm like, Phil, I need some brain work. I need something to think about. I think that was the one time that I was like, I tried to direct him into what I needed. And so he got me building this gravity operated vent box, which was much more fun for me.
Wow.
Just to have something to think about and to understand a new concept. But yeah, no more, not a lot of questions along the way, from me. I was pretty good at just doing what I was told. I'm not saying that that's the right way to do it. That's just how I learn.
No, I guess I'm sure there are some moments when you wish other people were more that way inclined, but that's another that's another story. I'm definitely a questions person, so
sure.
But yeah, I can totally appreciate where you're coming from. And that was Ushuaia, and that led to more work with Earthships.
Right. So a couple of weeks into it, Mike, who I'd never spoken to yet, comes up to me after one of the classes, and he's like, "What's your name?" I'm like, "Harrison." And he says, "Right, Phil tells me you're a force to be reckoned with," and I was like, "Okay." He's like, "You want to come and work for me?" And I was like, "Well, sure." I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know like what it entailed or what it absolutely, like, I'm sure he didn't either, like what was going to come from that. He's like, "I've got this job for a client coming up in Canada." And as Mike does, starts throwing out a lot of like locations around the world and really sells the dream of it. And I told him that it was fine. I'll come and do the job in Canada and we'll see what happens after that. And so 6 months later, I do a job in Canada, in Alberta, Canada, with the crew and with Mike, and we do that job, and that job went really well, and I got to know Mike a little bit more and the rest of the crew, and then I had another gap before the next build, and I ended up here in Europe, and that was the first time I came to Ireland, which is now where I live.
Wow. Ireland's a beautiful country. So let's move. Okay, let's move slowly into. Let's just fill out what Earthships are, just quickly, in case anyone's listening to this and doesn't know. There's enough information on the internet to keep you busy for many decades, but we're talking about 6 main principles, aren't we? And these are, I guess it'd be more interesting to talk about these in terms of which were new to you because of Earthships, even though you'd had so much experience beforehand.
Sure.
So let's start with reusing materials.
Sure. So I guess we kind of talked about that.
Yeah.
In that, my journey to that point. I was very interested in reusing materials.
I mean, the most notable material would have been the tires, I guess. I mean, bottles, was that something you'd used before?
A little bit with natural building and cob building. Never with the techniques that we do it with Earthship. Usually using whole bottles, burying them in the wall and just leaving the bottle itself, the whole bottle exposed, the side of the bottle rather than the base of the bottle.
Great. We built a little sort of example of tires and bottle walls here in Italy one time. We used Magnum champagne, Franciacorta, which is a local champagne. We used Magnum bottles, which are super strong, and put them top to tail, and filled out almost an entire sort of non-structural wall with those. But yeah, great. Okay.
Amazing.
Next one is, well, collecting water. Is that something you've done?
Not really. And which is something that I guess kind of irked me a little bit. Growing up in Australia, in a country that's often in doubt, and while I was growing up, was definitely in the middle of or during the period of a 7-year drought. I very rarely entered into discussions or heard discussions about collecting rainwater.
Wow.
It was all just about using less water. No one was talking about alternative ways of collecting it. No one was talking about maybe stepping out of the system a little bit and finding new systems. And it was a totally new concept to me when I entered Earthships, and it shouldn't have been, but it was.
I think that's symptomatic, though, of where we're at as a society, a world society almost. I mean, there are places where water's collected, but here in Italy, you know, you have roofs that very carefully direct the water down to drains, which go down to, you know, down to the street and down other more unburied drains all the way to the lake, and they take away, you know, water from the house, and then you walk into the bathroom and flush down, you know, your shit with drinking water.
Yeah.
And it just strikes me as, you know, if we were kindergarten children, that's the point that the teacher would come in and say, no, not like this. And everyone would be, you know, washing their mouth out with soap or something, because it's just crazy.
Yeah. It will get to that point. I think we're just humans are just kind of weird, and it's just like a trait of ours that it often takes for things to get to a drastic point or an irreversible point for us to accept that we've got to change the way that we're doing something. We do it with relationships, we do it with learning, we do it with mistakes that we're making. We push and push and push until we're forced to change the way that we're acting.
No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, when it comes to water, there's two ways we can go now. I mean, there are some countries that are actually actively banning the use of rainwater because we've polluted the air so much that it's not, or they say it's not safe. So, I mean, it can go two ways, can't it? But we're getting to that crisis point where a lot of people are inspired to look for solutions now. And that's sort of what this podcast is about, what Offgrid building is about, certainly what Earthship have been doing for decades. And it feels like a lot of people are coming at this stuff from different angles. But maybe we can get onto that a little bit later with talking about community. Let's just finish off these points, these 6 or even 7 points.
Sure.
We're on collecting water. Okay, let's not get too started about that. We've bashed that one. Generating power. I mean, off-grid solar and wind is I think one of the most common things and one of the ones that is taking off. So I'd imagine that's something you obviously knew about and maybe had even used.
It was something I knew about for sure. The off-grid aspect was, Earthship was the first time I encountered off-grid. So while I used some of these principles before, it was never they were never used for survival. They were never used as like the sole way of bringing that resource to the house. So again, in Australia growing up, there were a lot of like government rebate schemes around solar arrays, putting solar panels on your house, and giving that energy back to the grid, which got a lot of people putting solar on their house, investing in these systems, getting rebates back from the government for it. But it was nothing you ever had to think about. You were still connected to the grid. You were still used to the grid power. You never thought about it. All that it meant was that your electricity bill came down slightly from what it was. So that was my real only interaction with solar up to that point, apart from, and it's ended up translating a lot with off-grid living. My dad's a sailor. He works on yachts up in the Whitsundays in Australia. He's a yacht charterer, and all of the systems in boats are off-grid.
Yeah.
And so I started seeing a lot of correlations between the systems, like ideas like inverters and charge controllers and these devices, and the ways that we catch power, we store power, and we use power weren't completely foreign to me. I'd seen and used them all before, but never in a house, never on land, never in a living situation. So that was definitely learning for me.
So using also, remaining on DC for things like lights and that kind of thing, and using batteries and all of that.
Yeah, exactly. I'd seen and used those systems before on yachts, and so they weren't completely foreign.
Nice. The next one's a biggie, self-heating and self-cooling.
Yeah, that was definitely new, and I would say that's the same for most people. The first time they encounter Earthships, the idea of non-mechanical heating and cooling for the house is fairly foreign to most people in the world, builders or not. We all live in homes. We all like interact with some kind of heating and cooling systems. But there's very few companies out there or people out there who are doing completely passive, not even fire to generate their heat. So that was a huge learning curve for me, and it was really my first introduction into the importance of physics in building.
Right.
That buildings weren't just about engineering. They weren't about learning how to use materials, be they recycled or new conventional materials. It wasn't just about learning how to build cool structures with those materials. There was a bigger aspect to it, and that was the human aspect. Like, how do we live in these buildings? How do we make them comfortable and desirable and homely? And that's where the physics comes in. For off-grid buildings, that's where you've really got to start harnessing what Mike Reynolds, the guy who started Earthships, what he calls like nature's unarguable phenomenons.
Yeah. Phenomena.
Phenomena.
Yeah.
Exactly. In his great accent.
Yeah. Be it. Everything. Absolutely. No, that's where it really gets fascinating, isn't it? To see how stuff that's already there, how you can just use what's there and what's, it feels like moving down a river rather than up a river when you start using nature's forces.
Absolutely. And I remember it started this whole train of thinking for me where I started looking at everything and seeing the energy that it produced and just trying to think of like how we could catch it. I remember like every time I saw a fire, I was just like, all that heat, like all that energy pushing that smoke into the air, or that like wood getting burnt, it's all just getting wasted or getting lost. Like every time the wind blows, like the waves crashing against the rocks, the power of water in like everywhere that it is in nature is so phenomenal. And I started seeing things through these eyes of just like, how do we catch it? How do we use that energy? I remember spending a lot of time thinking about how to capture the energy of a sneeze, because it just seemed like such a concentrated, intense amount of energy that we produce so easily, and we can even induce it. We can even make ourselves sneeze. And if we had this little contraption that could just catch that energy, and then we could charge our phone with it, or we could whatever it was. But I remember spending like a solid week trying to think of a contraption that we could catch sneezes with.
Well, can you yeah, the whole people be carrying around pepper sprays and just sort of charging up their
Exactly.
iPhones, and there'd just be sneezes everywhere.
Yeah, and I'd be terrible. The repercussions of that would have been so terrible. I'm sure like disease would have started spreading a lot quicker, and people going to hospital from sneezing too much, eyeballs popping out of their heads, whatever it was.
Yeah, that always impressed me as a kid. Apparently I read, and I'm not sure it's true, that if you don't shut your eyes, your eyeballs would come out and all that. Well, I'm not going to take this conversation further down the bodily functions that could provide energy. But back on track, I guess the self-heating and the self-cooling is, to me, one of the areas that would be the first domino. You know, I always think that if someone, you know, in Italy or wherever comes into your house and they say, "Oh no, it's nice, it's pleasant in here," you know, and it's freezing cold outside, you're inside in a t-shirt, and they say, "Well, how much does heating cost you?" And you say to them, "0." That's a domino, the first domino falling right there, isn't it? Because so many people will be saying, "Well, why am I paying, you know, X hundred of whatevers to heat my house, and it can just be happen for free." Apart from the fact that it would happen for free without polluting and without voting for wars. It's just a big one.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's the same here in Ireland, and I think in any country where the temperature fluctuates outside of that tropical, comfortable temperature, is that people are worried about how much it costs to heat and cool their homes. In Australia, it was all about air conditioning and fans and how to cool down your home. In Ireland, it's all about how to heat up your home. And there's a dozen different ways to heat your home and different heating systems that you can put in. And they all cost different amounts, and they all have different pros and cons, and they all have different sales pitches. But in the end, they all consume something to heat the home.
Well, they all fall short of that graph that Mike shows on his presentations of, you know, Taos being what, -30 or -20 at least in the winter, and +30 or 35 in the summer, and maintaining a cool, comfortable sort of 21, 22, 23 degrees year round passively.
Absolutely. And that graph was produced by a guy called Martin Freeney, who's a friend who lives in Australia. He's from Adelaide, and he's built himself an Earthship in Australia. But he actually went to Taos to prove that Earthships don't work for his thesis for university. And he went with all of these data collection techniques, measuring wind, temperature, humidity, with a thermal camera, checking for cold spots and around the house and cold leaks, and went back, produced these graphs, and realized that these houses worked really well. And it's absolutely, there's flaws, and a lot of it comes down to how well they're built and how much care is taken when they're built, but that they function really, really well. And that was coming from someone who set out to prove us wrong.
Wow. Brilliant. 2 more to go, I think. Treating sewage is always a fun one to get involved with. Treating sewage is one that I guess you hadn't done before.
Correct. Yeah. My only exposure to like anything outside of I flush the toilet and the poo disappears was a composting toilet. And that made sense to me. And it was a good system. There were flaws in it. I had never used a really nice one. But yeah, I had never encountered anything like the Earthship technique for dealing with sewage, which, I may as well just explain it quickly.
Yeah, definitely.
Is that when you flush the toilet, so it's a normal, water toilet, it's an anaerobic system, so everything's underwater. You flush the toilet, and the the shit moves down into a septic tank. Whether we build our own septic tank or whether we buy a septic tank, either way, it's a vessel to hold that shit and that sewage, and it builds up in there, it collects, and it breaks down just like a normal septic tank. The treatment happens after that, where it moves into what we call a planter cell or a planter bed, which is basically a trench around 3 feet deep, 2 to 3 feet wide, and usually the length of our buildings, which is somewhere between 60 to 100 feet. And it's a lined cell, so it becomes like a pond or a swimming pool. You line it with a pond liner, and we fill it up with layers of gravel, different sizes of gravel, sand, peat moss, soil, and we get to the top where you plant plants in it. And so the sewage after the septic tank moves into this planter cell, moves through the entire planter cell, through that filtration system which we've set up, full of the gravel and the rocks and the sand, and the plants sucking up the water from that bed as well, that being their sole source of nutrients and water, that by the time it's completed that whole run, that 100 feet or whatever, and it reaches the other end, it's clean, it's done all the work, all the particles, all the bacteria, all the stuff that we associate with sewage being terrible and bad and dangerous gets eaten up by the plants before then.
Yeah. I mean, it is amazing to see, the architects building in Taos and how many people go through there when there's an academy on, and just to know that nothing comes out, nothing overflows.
Yeah, it's one of these systems that Mike never could have proven it before he built it. And there's so much of what we do that we never could have proved that it worked without doing it first. And that's where, I won't go into it, but that's where Mike's whole journey through the courts and getting laws passed in New Mexico and getting permission to do experimental buildings, that's why that was so important. And that's why he did it, was so that we could build things without knowing if they were going to work. We could experiment. And yeah, some things fail, but some things work really well. And that one thing working really well justifies all the failures. It makes sense of all the failures, and that's the nature of experimenting.
Totally. I mean, I'd love to invite anyone on the podcast who could argue for restrictions that don't let people experiment, because it just seems a no-brainer to be learning and to be trying out this stuff. And sure, there are risks, and sure, there's going to be failures, but there have to be. But that is another story in some sense. That's a whole podcast right there.
Sure. I mean, you can already imagine the concerns are going to be to do with safety and to do with how these buildings are being used. But a lot of that comes down to preference and opinion, and no one's forcing anyone to experiment with buildings. And I guess what's important in the end is that you're the only person who gets affected by the things that you build, which is stipulated in that law that Mike got passed, that you're not allowed to rent or sell that building if it's built under the experimentation law.
Right.
It's yours. It's yours to deal with. It's yours to take the risk on.
Right.
And there's very few people who are willing to take that risk. So in the end, it does just end up being a few people who are really passionate around this idea of learning how to build better homes that get to do it.
Yeah, I've often thought, it'd be nice to be able to say to the state, listen, I take responsibility for, insuring and sort of whatever happens in this house, and have even someone, a little waiver on the door that people just have to sign the first time they come into your house to say, listen, I'm accepting the risks of walking into this house, and just having that be, sort of a way of letting people build their own stuff, because otherwise the permit problem is something that we shouldn't get too started on, because it is such a limit, and it is the main block for people, for lots of these houses being able to pop up and stop using and polluting and all that kind of stuff. Cool. I think we're at the last one of the 6 Earthship principles, which is food. Arguably, the weakest spot, but I think it's just a spot that needs more experimentation again to see how much food you can grow in a dense place. But I know I've seen houses in Taos that are growing amazing amounts of food, the Phoenix being one example of a lot of food in a house. I guess that was a new one to you as well, or not?
Yeah, it was. And, you know, the food thing is one of those things that's very specific to Taos in a way that it's not to the rest of the world, or to a lot of other places in the world, where it's almost impossible to farm in Taos. Now, there's very few places that we've built outside of Taos that have such unfarmable conditions.
Right.
And it's not impossible, but it's very hard there. And so the food production thing, while it might be the weakest point of the building, as in you can't produce every aspect of your meal or your like dietary requirements from what you grow in that greenhouse, in the rest of the world, you can grow food outside. You've got more options. You have more access to different resources. And, the food thing, it wasn't the first time I've encountered that. I've done like a lot of farming, and in the natural building world, farming is a big part of that as well. Anywhere that starts using words like permaculture and living in like a harmonious with nature way is all about farming too. And that makes sense. And lots of people are doing it, and lots of people are having varying levels of success with it. And it's a whole other world for me. Here, maybe this is a slight tangent, but here in Ireland, I have one group of friends who live 10 minutes away, and they have a community garden, a farm now. They've just expanded over the last few years. And they're really passionate about feeding people, about teaching people how to farm, about feeding people really good quality food, making people healthier, and transferring that knowledge as much as they can. And talking with them, one of my main motivations for what I do and why I moved from coffee to building was that building is one of those like core human traits. It's like something that every human needs to be able to do to survive. Back before we had other people to do all our work for us, we had to be able to build our own shelter, and we had to be able to source our own food. And they're these two extremes, these two like basic human needs that all humans are kind of meant to know how to do. It's like it's in our DNA to want to know how to do these things, and how to construct them, or how to gather them, or how to hunt them. And I think that's something that we're losing and in danger of evolving out of, that very few people in the last 50 years, like the majority of people, haven't built their own houses, have no idea how to build their own homes, have no idea how to grow their own food. And that's a kind of interesting thought. What happens when we, as a race, as a human population, forget how to do those things?
Well, I totally agree. I mean, being able to take care of yourself and your family and your friends and your community, gives an enormous amount of satisfaction and happiness as well, doesn't it? I mean, it's not about the work and the time and the efficiency and the production. It's none of these numbers. It's just, are you eating? Are you warm? Are you dry? The real basics. And it seems like being connected to that is being happy. I mean, connection is clearly a part of happiness. Depression is often the lack of connection. And I think that in today's world, you've got, we're increasingly specialized at certain things, whether it's programming or certain manufacturing techniques. And we're not connected to the basics, which are these two things you've just mentioned. And that's something that that I think is coming back in a little bit. I mean, we're moving towards a discussion now of community. What are the examples? You've mentioned one of your friends, 10 minutes down the road, but what are the examples of community that for you work? Because it's something I think we're very new to in many senses. A lot of the, younger generations who haven't had to pull together to survive the war, for instance, and you see a lot of people here and older people here in Italy that talk about community because they had to be a community. But what are the examples that you've seen, traveling that have worked, and why do you think they work?
I guess community for me is about supporting each other, or supporting the people around you, and in turn being supported by the people around you, to an extent to like meet some of the needs that you can't meet on your own.
Okay.
I don't think, for me, community isn't the be all and end all. It's not the answer to these, to a lot of these problems that we're talking about, but it's a way of dealing with them. And it's a way, especially, of learning how to deal with them. The example of me and the Moy Hill farm, 10 minutes down the road, is that they provide me vegetables regularly. And in turn, I help build structures for them.
Right.
That's like a perfect example of like trade in its most balanced sense, in that for me, I don't have the time, and for someone else, they might not have the land to grow their own food. They might not have the skill. And when I say I don't have the time, I choose not to have the time.
Yeah.
I'm focusing that energy on something else. I could make time for it. I could travel less so that I have more time and more attention for vegetables, but I don't, because I have this community around me who are happy to provide for me when I need it. And in turn, I provide for them when they need it. And for me, that's community working at its best. Moving into like more condensed communities where we start sharing more daily resources, like water and power. There's definitely an avenue to go down there for community living, and it's going to be a very steep learning curve for everyone. And I'm at the top of that list. I'm not ready to live in a community. I'm not ready to make community decisions. I'm open to it, and I'm learning how to do it, but it's hard for me, for sure. The house that I own with a friend, and even making community decisions in our community of two is sometimes so hard. And it's so hard for me to accept. It's so hard for us to come to conclusions and resolve issues that, I'm terrified of like entering a community of 20 people or 30 people before learning the ways that are going to help that community function well. And I guess what I've learned is that it's all about communication. Like the thing I'm scared most of in community is the decision-making process.
Mm-hmm.
And it's arguing with someone about something that affects me very directly. I never want to do that. I avoid conflict in like all aspects of my life. And what that usually means is that I try to be very self-sustained, that I try not to need things from other people. And that's kind of the opposite of entering into a community, idea where I set up a situation where I do need something from other people. I'm always the one having everything I need and sharing that out with people as they need it. And I guess that's a bit of a control thing for me, is that I don't have to ask permission when I can farm the vegetables out of the garden, or when I can build this certain part to my house. I don't have to check with anyone about which weeds I can pull out and what materials I can use to build with. I find that stuff really, really difficult. And this probably isn't even the question that you asked.
No, it very much is. It very much is the question. Very much is the question.
Okay.
I mean, we're talking about, I mean, I feel the same way. I feel we're very much, sort of adolescent in some ways as a society. I mean, I'm certainly the same in terms of control or wanting to at least be sure that I can direct my trajectory, at least somewhat. And the question of community is one that I was looking on Amazon the other day about for books on how to create communities. It's something I'd like to explore more in this podcast with people. So it's great that you brought it up. And what was weird is that there don't seem to be any, and if anyone knows of any, then please, let me know. But there don't seem to be any really good books. I found one that I bought that I'm waiting for to read. A lot of them are connected to the church, which, I don't want to say anything good or bad about the church here, but they always have an ulterior aspect to communities. So people who do this and they get together, or people who do that and they get together. There's no, well, there probably is, but I haven't found information, and this is what is for me interesting about off-grid living, where the idea is literally to take care of the basics, to be sort of maybe individuals that work well on their own, but better together. I think that's where there's some potential for off-grid communities. But, I mean, you've spent time in Taos. There are a few communities there. Have you had any thoughts about those ways of doing things?
I haven't. I don't have many experiences with Taos, but there is something I'd like to add to what you were just saying, is that I don't know, this just came while you were talking about the church then. I think for me, the key to having communities work well and be able to be scalable and spreadable and inviting to the rest of the world is to separate community from cult, and to make sure that when we're setting up a community, we're not setting up a barrier of us and them. And we're not saying that we're living like this and you're living like that, or we believe in this and you don't believe in this. So we're going to come together and create this small community, and we're only going to let people in who agree with us. I don't think that's the answer. I think that is far more on the cult side of, and whether it's a cult of one, whether it's just you on your own being like, I'm going to live like this, and I'm not open to any ideas. I'm not going to sit here and explain all of the reasons or the ways that I do things to you people, because you don't understand it. I think the separation of those two ideas, and it's funny, every time I say the word cult, it sounds very taboo in my head, but I just mean it in that I feel like those two things are the polar opposites. That a good, healthy community invites everyone in and offers to share everything that it's learning and be open to being wrong. I mean, that's how we learn. We get so stuck on our ideologies and our ideas and our techniques. And I'm not guilty of this. I am guilty of this, is a better way of saying that. And most people that I know are very guilty of this as well, is that we do something and we do something a certain way and it works. And when it gets challenged, we're like, no, I've already got a way of doing that. And it's working for me. So I don't want to hear a new way of doing it. But change is important. Change is how we evolve and how we learn. And it's what we're asking everyone else to do. So we have to be open to it ourselves. If we want to learn how to live in a better way, we have to be willing to learn how to live in a better way, different from whatever we think is the right way of doing it. And it's about like losing the ego and losing that mentality and of us and them, of me versus you, or me versus the world. I don't think that's the solution or the answer to any of our problems. I think it's really important that we're together on this. We're together with like the people who are living what we might consider, or what I might consider, indulgent, selfish lives that take into account no one other than themselves, and the effects on no one other on the effects that their lives have on anyone else but themselves. It's all about them. And there's people on the other end of that who are solely caring about other people and become martyrs for their own cause and for their own beliefs. And I think community is like the healthy in between of that, where we learn and we teach and we're willing to be wrong.
Wow. Yeah, I've got millions of questions that have just branched off from what you're saying. We're both passionate about humanitarian work, and the key here is to find good projects that have a long-term sort of approach. I think the one we were both involved in now in Nepal, I was very impressed with the HEC and 10 Friends' approach of creating teachers. I know that teaching is something that you feel strongly about. It's something that you've brought into the projects you've been involved in a very strong way. Can you just mention what does teaching mean to you in terms of off-grid and how that works well from what you've seen on the projects?
In my mind, I found a little loophole in my passion for humanitarian work, and what started out as a purely I need to go out and build buildings and for people who need them, and help people who need them, build hospitals for people who need hospitals. That was definitely my mentality in Kenya and India when I was in those places. Earthship, working with Earthship has given me an opportunity to teach people about building in a way that I still get to build buildings for groups like the HEC, the Himalayan Education Center group, while teaching the people who come to learn, the students who were on that build. Now, like, I agree with you that, yeah, we're both really passionate about humanitarian work. For me, the teaching of those students there were 14 different countries there, a lot of them very developed countries. Teaching those students is equivalent to my current humanitarian work. It's the way that I see myself having the most impact on the world, other than what I can do myself. I can build a building a month. That's my limit. That's my absolute limit of what I can do. My body might last another 10 to 20 years of building these buildings. And if we think about it in a numbers sense, and let's say I take a month off between every build, say I build 6 buildings a year for the next 20 years, that's 120 buildings that I can build on my own. So that's 120 communities that I can help in my humanitarian work sense, in doing what's important to me. What I get to do now is I get to teach, every time I build a building, I get to teach 30 to 100 students how to build. And even if only 1 or 2% of those students go and do work outside of their own homes and their own personal projects, even if only 2% of them build buildings for other people, I've tripled or quadrupled or times 10 the amount of impact that my energy gets to put back into the world. And in a sense of how many buildings I get to build, it's uncountable how many more projects and more communities might be able to get affected by teaching people to build rather than just building the buildings myself. And so that's more and more becoming my priority and my focus, is the transfer of knowledge. And it's not solely the transfer of knowledge to local communities in developing countries where I want to teach locals how to use the techniques we use to build homes and build homes for themselves. There is a huge value in that. And I do that, and I will continue to do that. And there are a lot of other people out there doing that as well. But what I'm seeing the most value in now is teaching as many people as I can how to build so that they can take that and do whatever it is that they're going to do. And when I'm interacting with hundreds of students every year, there's just no knowing like where that stuff's going to go. And I can only hope that the work I'm doing with them and that the things that I'm teaching them and the conversations like this that we get to have when we're stuck up in the Himalayas like we were in Nepal with no TV and no radio and no cinemas and nothing to distract us. When we start having conversations like this, like between teaching someone how to build a building and maybe sparking an idea in them that they should go and build a building for someone else, I've kind of just scored a free building. You know, it's like one less building that I have to build.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the main aims of this podcast, is to get people who are interested in this together to come and learn. There's a few questions I want to ask that are going to sort of lead from this, but let's talk about what an ideal project is, just for a second.
Sure.
We want a building that is going to not just be for a family who live there and stay in that building. Ideally, a building that would show as many people what it's like to live in it, to inspire, a building that inspires as many people as possible. That's one, isn't it? Two, a building, well, to even the building of which is going to, as you said before, teach other people about it. A building that's maybe going to be used to do good, whether it's maybe education or for health. Those are two really easy ones. Projects that are going to inspire through being newsworthy. Projects that are going to get talked about and reach further than just the one town they're built in. I mean, even the building we built in Kanbari in the eastern district of Nepal had a growing number of spectators, didn't it, as we were building?
Sure.
We became the television set almost over the 3 weeks.
Yeah.
National media were there covering it. There were people interviewing us left, right, and centre. There's always film crews, aren't there? I mean, when certainly when Earthships are being built.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so all of these factors, there's no shortage of people. There's no shortage of people wanting to do, to learn. Good projects and funding and permits are good projects. So there's a number of them, and I'd love to hear from anyone who has a project in mind, who would like to maybe build a building, with us. But there's funding and permits. Permits for humanitarian buildings tend to be relatively easy, in the sense that people are just happy that you're going to build them a great building. Unlike here in Italy or in Europe in general, where we tend to get bogged down by that, but we're not going to go into that again. So essentially, funding. Let's just talk very briefly about what's needed for a house of this type, without too many specifics, because each place is different. Timber costs different amounts, cement costs different amounts. But Earthship can build a building, bringing volunteers from all over the world to work for free. That's a start, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah. And that's because of this system that we have, where we teach as we build. It's a win-win situation. We get to provide a building, and we get to teach people how to build that building as we go, and give that building to a community or a space or people who need it. And I guess I just want to add one thing, is that my idea of a community building or a humanitarian project isn't restricted to developing countries, isn't restricted to places where planning permission is very lax and no one's going to ask too many questions. Any community orientated building is of huge value to me, and I see great potential in it, and I see great potential in sharing what we do with off-grid buildings with the developed world just as fast as we share it with the undeveloped parts of the world. Any building, say here in Ireland, if someone was building a building for the community, to serve the community, that's a humanitarian project for me. That's a project worth pursuing, just as much as a teacher training center in Himalaya was a project worth pursuing.
Yeah, I hear. I mean, we've got a potential project in France that incorporates refugee integration and a community of people that have always worked with refugees and homeless people who want to live together and create a big building that does both of those things, providing shelter for themselves, and showing an example in a city environment of a community that works to do something good, i.e., helping refugees integrate. That kind of project in an urban environment would be ideal, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's the dream. That's the high exposure project.
Yeah. Well, there's going to be a website up by the time this comes out, which is going to sort of outline some of these points, and we're open to new projects. So if anyone out there has a project that you're interested in getting in touch with us about, then definitely do so.
Great.
Just before finishing, I'm going to say that and then probably carry on talking, but there's a couple more things. How can people get involved? I mean, obviously we've mentioned that people can come and learn on projects with us, Earthship. There's plenty of Earthbag and Cob workshops all around the world. There's loads of ways to get involved. But what would you suggest? People sometimes feel a little bit maybe helpless. They say, well, I'm not a professional builder. I haven't gone to Kenya and I haven't gone to India and done loads of stuff. So what would someone hearing this for the first time, how would they be able to get involved with off-grid and humanitarian work?
I guess it depends in what capacity they're interested in, but whether they're looking to build an off-grid structure for themselves, or whether they're looking to build it for someone else or for a community, if they've never built an off-grid structure before, go and build one. Go and sign up to a course, and yeah, it's probably going to cost you a little bit of money, but it's worth understanding what it is that you're asking someone else to do for you, or what it is that you're thinking of trying to get to do for yourself. Knowledge is going to be the greatest asset here, and one of the main things that absolutely like anyone takes away from coming to learn from us at Earthship is they learn what it takes to build a building, and they learn how to communicate with builders. And at the very least, if someone is interested in building at all, or off-grid building, or doing projects outside of their own community, that they're going to be much more effective at their job with the more information that they have and the more experience that they have. They're going to be able to ask people to do things for them with a lot more confidence if they know exactly what it is they're asking these people to do for them.
Absolutely. Yeah, you mentioned the academy as well. There's courses, there's online materials, and just to start, it's that classic, isn't it? Just start.
Yeah, just do it. I mean, how do you learn anything? How do you learn a language? Just start learning it. You start like listening to it, and you start hearing things. And it's the same thing. If you want to learn how to build, start building. Just start attaching things together and see how you feel about it. See where it takes you. And if it's disastrous and it really starts bringing you down, get someone to teach you how to do it. And if you get someone to teach you how to do it and you still don't want to be the one building, but you want to help create more buildings, then that's fine. At least you know, and at least you understand that you don't want to do this. And when you ask someone else to do it for you, you're going to have a lot more respect for them for doing a job that you don't want to do yourself.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of hidden aspects as well, aren't there? I mean, if you're a lawyer, you could help people to push permits through. If you're a teacher, you can speak about this to children and show videos, and there's millions of ways to get involved.
Absolutely. If you're really good at social media, you can help promote projects, and you can help get projects off the ground and get funding and crowdfunding and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone is, or, if you're a writer, you can tell the story of projects once they're finished, or photograph, film projects. Totally. There's so many ways. And if anyone's interested, as always, just get in touch. As we sort of end, I just want to ask you, are there any resources or specifically books that you'd recommend to people? Either about building or even any other subjects or even fiction that you find important that have inspired you? Do you have any books that spring to mind?
A lot of my favorite books and a lot of the reading that I do has nothing to do with building. It's my escape from building more than anything. I read a lot of technical building books and documents, which I wouldn't recommend to anyone. It's like terribly boring unless you're actually putting it into practice. But there's one author that I'll mention who talks about engineering. He talks about engineering and the engineering of building and the structural value of different materials in a really colloquial, common man way. He makes it accessible the same way that Richard Feynman makes physics accessible to everyone, of every age group, almost past the age of 15. J.E. Gordon writes some incredible books that go into a lot of detail in a really easy to understand way about engineering, about how structures work. And I think it's the title of one of his books, Why Structures Don't Fall Down. And he's a great resource for building. And things I mentioned, Richard Feynman, Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, is probably the best introductory to physics and to a physics mind that anyone could ever come across.
That's great. Those two, I've ordered the first one you mentioned. We'd spoken about that before. And Feynman one is so high on my list. It's amazing. I haven't bought it yet. It's been on there for years. So that's another prod towards it for sure.
Excellent.
So any sort of parting asks or requests that you have of anyone that anything to check out, anything, if you do want people to get in touch, I can definitely leave your details at some point, somewhere, whether it's, I know you're not a particularly, social media, enthusiast. Are you on Twitter or any of those?
No, I'm not. But it's not that I'm not an enthusiast. I see a lot of value in it. I just don't have time for it myself. I don't make time for it myself. But I see a huge value in it, and I see a huge value in the communication channels that it provides. For me, I just use post and email. So my email address is just my name @gmail.com. So anyone will be able to get that from this show's title. And and as far as asks go, is just to be conscious, not really any asks or any requests, but just a suggestion to think carefully about the path that you're taking and how much value you're offering, and maybe let's start start changing our orientation from how much we can get to how much we can give. And I really think that's a key way to feeling happy and feeling fulfilled and feeling satisfied, is understanding our place and our own value in the world by how much we give to it and not how much we take from it.
Wow. Yeah. On that note, one thing that always struck me about any project I've done, building projects, even other ones as well, but especially the building ones, have been, they always involve the three things that I believe make people happy. Growing and learning, giving or teaching, and just being part of something that's bigger than yourself. When you get one
Absolutely.
of those, when you get one of those, it's already a good thing, but three together is just the jackpot, for sure. Well, we haven't talked about a lot of stuff. We haven't talked about group dynamics and all this kind of stuff, but there's room for definitely further on down the line another show. But Harry, I have to say thank you for this, and
it's my pleasure.
Yeah, and we'll speak soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Patrick.
Really hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. There are show notes and links to anything we talked about on offgrid.vision. Please do subscribe and leave some comments. Obviously positive ones are much appreciated. That will help us grow, get more people on the show, and hopefully raise some money for some great projects. Till next time, goodbye.